when we spoke last time, it was right when I think it was 28 out of 29. New Jersey was the only state that reports party registration by party, had not reported it, and all 28 of those 29 moved either more Republican or less Democratic, or a combination thereof.
It was Connecticut
You've
that had
looked
reported.
at, apologies, Connecticut. And by the way, just so we complete that circle, is Connecticut now reporting?
They still haven't reported. I think I'm looking for an update for them by November. But that's the only one, and the
Are
only
you
one
kidding
that
me?
the only one that has moved left of the 29 is Utah, and that number is 38-21, and it actually ticked Republican last month, so that was clearly from voter roll maintenance that cut an R+39 state down a little bit. So effectively, every state that registers is more Republican.
So here's the interesting thing before we get into the update. When I had Harmeet Dillon on the phone, she's the assistant the assistant attorney general for civil rights. They've asked every state for their voter rolls, which you would think would be an easy thing, a public thing. Seth, the Department of Justice can't get it. I literally did not think this would be that big of a deal. But when Harmeet Dillon is having trouble with the Secretary of State from the Department of Justice, how big of a problem do we have right now in terms of really understanding where the voter rolls are?
There's a really good reason these states won't turn them over. Recently, I was named a special advisor for pure integrity Michigan elections. And Michigan, as you know, is one of the most important battleground states in the country, not just for presidential races, but for control of the U.S. House. And there's constantly there's Senate races that are, there's one coming up here in the fall. And Michigan is probably the worst of all states when it comes to the voter roll. 81% of the total population is registered to vote. Now, that's on the total voter roll. Only about 80% of a population is even over the age of 18 before you start disqualifying non-citizens and those who are in prison. Michigan has about 93% of the total eligible voting population registered to vote. And that's because they have automatic voter registration. The Secretary of State there, Jocelyn Benson, is an extremely corrupt official who happens to be running for governor in 2026. So there's a reason they don't comply. Any state that has automatic voter registration is bound to have a very bad voter roll. Pennsylvania's is slightly better than Michigan's. They put in automatic registration 2 years ago by executive fiat. Wisconsin doesn't have it. They have a much lower percentage of the population registered to vote. But remember, only 5 electoral votes were won by Kamala Harris in races that were not under automatic voter registration. That was the 4 from New Hampshire, which we pegged as a tight race, and then the 1 split vote of Omaha, Nebraska's 2nd congressional district.
That is unbelievable when you think about it.
248-5 in favor of Trump. Non-automatic voter registration.
All right, you put out the voter registration by party updates for key 2026 and 2028 battlegrounds just a little while ago. I want to start, we'll go state by state with the ones that you put out. Let's start with Florida. Tell me what the shift looks like. Where were we and where are we now since the most recent update?
Florida is the state that has the most severe adjustments to voter registration by party every single month. Some of that is due to maintenance of the voter roll. 12,000 of the shift last month was because Palm Beach County cut its voter rolls, and of course it disparately harmed the Democrats. But Florida has moved from R plus 7.8 in the 2024 election. It's now R plus 10. I had thought last month Florida would hit R plus 10 by the end of the year. It was actually by the end of August. Florida's coming on a 1.4 million voter registration advantage probably in the next 2 months. And this is such a big number. I actually saw Governor DeSantis speak at a Freedom Caucus event last week, and he brought that number up. So Florida is important for people to understand because it's got traction with the working class states of the Midwest. Except for 2020, which, as we know, was the safest and most secure election of all time, as we were told. I don't know that I believe that. Florida, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have moved in the same direction every presidential election since 1952. And Miami-Dade County has never been won by a Republican who did not win the presidency. Miami-Dade is also now a Republican registration advantage state. So it looks to me like any future Republican presidential nominees are on pace to carry Miami-Dade County and therefore likely the rest of the nation. So Florida is still Florida and it still matters, even though it's starting to lose some of its swingy qualities.
So as we get ready for 2028, will Florida be considered a battleground state?
No. At this rate, Florida is going to be a 15 or higher point win for a Republican nominee as long as they are in the mold of a populist or America First type. Now, a reversion of the Republican Party to the party of Mitt Romney and associates would likely send Florida reeling back to the left, especially given how many urban and suburban areas there are in the state.
I mean, that's a big deal. And so when they go to potentially redistrict, they got a lot of road to plow, right? I mean, in other words, DeSantis, if they're talking about trying to pick up an additional 3 or 4 seats, at least what I'm hearing you say is they've got a lot of room to grow and to potentially pick up new congressional seats because of the trend that's moving in the direction of Republicans.
The unique thing about Florida's races, and this is what I tell everyone about the U.S. House race next year. Now, things are constantly changing, and you really can't even start making predictions until maybe 60 or 90 days out, because those House races, unlike top of the ticket races, they are decided by the voter that will vote for the other party just because they prefer divided government. People don't understand these issues with House races or the headwind against the incumbent president's party, but you've seen Democrat wins in special elections lately. There's major turnout differentials that happen in off-year or special elections. They get a little bit better in midterms. But the Republicans and Democrats have so effectively mapped their states to where neither party has a very high ceiling, nor do they have a low floor. It is likely that the winner of the House is going to have somewhere between 218, which is the bare minimum majority, and maybe 225 seats. And if Newsom's efforts in California are struck down by courts, then the Republicans, I would think, would win the House or hold the House. But Florida is a 20-8 Republican split. And none of those 20 seats are vulnerable. There's only one seat that was won by the representative by less than 10 points, and that was Anna Paulina Luna's seat, and it was almost 10 points. The Dems had 3 seats that I saw that looked like they could flip as the boundaries were. So that there should be 3 or 4 seats that can probably be redrawn to move Republican, and I think you could find Democrat vote dumps in Orlando, Fort Lauderdale, and maybe one other place.
I hate to interrupt this conversation with Seth, but he's doing great work, and there's another organization in Washington doing great work. That's my friends at Concerned Women for America, led by my buddy Penny Nance. You've seen her on the show before. They are literally at the tip of the spear on the culture war. And I get my friends, if you are one of those moms out there, I don't need to tell you about it. You see it every day with your kids. In schools, with their friends, online, they are being attacked by the left, trying to cultivate them into this woke ideology culture. The CWA and the folks at Concerned Women for America have been at the tip of the spear when it comes to keeping men out of women's sports and so many other cultural issues. They focus on 7 core issues: family, sanctity of life, religious liberty, parental choice and education, fighting sexual exploitation, national sovereignty, and support for Israel, all of which is where we are right now. They are setting up chapters around the country. And if you will join me in making a contribution for at least $20 to Concerned Women, you will get Penny's new book, A Women's Guide, 7 Rules for Success, Business, in Life. All you have to do is go to concernedwomen.org, concernedwomen.org/Spicer, concernedwomen.org/Spicer. It'll help advance their cause, and you get an amazing book. Thank you for your consideration. Now back to the conversation with Seth. You've always been good at pointing out counties that mirror different things. And you say in Florida, keep an eye on Duval County. Why?
Duval County. When we were in the run up to the presidential election, one of the states that continued to give me trouble, even though the polling was good for Trump, was Georgia. And Georgia is one of those states that has automatic voter registration, a center of a lot of the problems with the 2020 election, Brad Raffensperger, the way he ran the state. But Georgia doesn't have registration by party. Georgia is probably the only Trump won state that I have real issues about organic trend. Atlanta's growing rapidly. The white vote around Atlanta isn't as conservative as it was, and you've got a lot of minority growth in Atlanta. That's Southern minority vote is much more loyal to the Democrats than it is elsewhere. And the rural vote is what I would call maxed out. So when I looked at Georgia, I was kind of, it was one of those states where I thought it could go the other way. And then I found through research that Duval County, Florida, which encompasses Metro Jacksonville, it's about the same demographics as Georgia. That's 30% Black, the rest white, Latino, some rural, some urban, and not super leftist. And that county had moved in the same path as Georgia since 2004. And that was my accurate look. And it had moved much more to the Republican side in voter registration under Biden's administration. And now Duval is more Republican than it was when Trump won the county and therefore won Georgia. So unless that gets off track, which is possible, then Georgia still should be moving in the right direction as Duval County. There's other examples of that around the country, like Scott County, Iowa is a good comp for the state of Wisconsin.
All right, well then let's go to Iowa. It shifted. You said R plus 710 since August. Walk us through what does that mean? And I know Joni Ernst, the Republican current incumbent senator, says she's not running for re-election. Ashley Hinson, current House member, is running for the Senate. Trump has endorsed her. The National Republican Senatorial Committee is getting behind Ashley Hinson. So the question is, do we need to worry about Iowa as a Republican state? Do Dems have a shot there? How is that looking?
Statewide races, Iowa is in the same category as Florida. Joni Ernst will be replaced by another Republican. And it's not going to be Trumpian margins, given that it's a midterm with a Republican president, but it should be solid. But Iowa's another 20,000 registrations more Republican than it was when Trump won the state by over 13 points. Remember, we had the Ann Seltzer poll that we had to deal with, and Speaker Gingrich tore that poll apart as well. But Iowa's another 20,000 more Republican, and we're now at the point where maintenance is done and Republicans are gaining and Dems are still losing registrations. Now, you're moving Iowa into a red state, just like Ohio is moving into a red state. So sometimes these margins, like a blowout game, can start to get out of control. But Iowa 1 and Iowa 3 U.S. House seats are very tight races. They're two of the tightest races in the House, and anything can go in those. So we cannot sleep on Iowa, but I mostly monitor Iowa because it's a good comp for Wisconsin and to a lesser degree, Minnesota.
So what do we, but I know I don't think we're getting into either one of those, but obviously they're important. So when you look at Wisconsin, what does Iowa tell us about Wisconsin? And what did you say, Michigan?
Minnesota.
So what does Iowa tell us about the trend of both of those two states?
Iowa suggests that Wisconsin should not be slipping left. Wisconsin's tight for a number of reasons, primarily because the urban areas are more dense and larger than you have in Iowa, but essentially you have a very similar electorate, especially there along the Mississippi River. Southwestern Wisconsin was the main reason Trump trended and flipped Wisconsin. Northeastern Iowa along the river, like Dubuque County and Scott County, those counties were reasons why Iowa went from a two-time Obama state to a blowout state for Trump. Minnesota is a much different story. The southern part of Minnesota is very much like Iowa and Wisconsin, but the Twin Cities is so dominant. It took 36 or more counties. I think it may have been 40 or more for Minneapolis, for Hennepin County to be canceled out. It's Harris margin in favor of that many Trump counties. Look, it's a lot of work that it takes to cover up Minnesota's urban areas, but the movement in Iowa suggests that the message that Kirk spread, the message that Trump holds, is still reverberating out throughout the center of the country. And I think that as the left radicalizes, that the middle of the country is going to continue to see this.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right. Are Wisconsin and Minnesota trending in the right direction, that maybe in a cycle or two, they're much more Republican than they are today? Is that what I'm hearing?
Based on the movement of Iowa and prior precedent, how it plays in elections and with party registration, they should be stabilized moving to the right.
So, okay, but here's the question then with Wisconsin specifically. The conservatives lost the majority on the Supreme Court. It's now 4-3 with the liberals. Another conservative justice announced that they are retiring. Based on the result of the special election, was that just a special, and special elections, as I love to say, are special? Or can we read something into this that says, hey, that was different because it was a one-off? If you put those elections back into a normal cycle, we should still be very competitive.
Those court races are troublesome. Wisconsin Democrats have figured out ballot harvesting. Why I say that is because Crawford, who I predicted that she would win the race by at least 5 points, but we didn't know that Brad Schimmel, it's not a partisan race, but he was the Republican. Schimmel had more votes than the previous Democrat who had won in 2023, and she won by 11 points. So Schimmel got votes. We had enough votes to where if you would have shown me just his vote total, I would have put money on him winning. But of course, Crawford came in with almost as many votes as Hillary Clinton pulled in a presidential election in 2016. So the only thing that can tell me is that over a lengthy early voting window, that Democrats have figured out how to get out the mail-in vote. Because 1.3 plus million votes, you could formally win a seat to the Wisconsin Supreme Court and off your election with 600,000 votes. Now, a million can't even get you within 10. So in a presidential turnout, it's possible. In these special elections, I don't think so. But the good news for the GOP is that in Wisconsin, there's only one seat that I see as potentially flippable by the Dems, and it's not that close. Van Orden's seat.
Oh, Derek's been on fire too, so I hope that's not the case. I know he'll work his tail off, though. Let's move back east to the Mid-Atlantic, Pennsylvania. It seems to be moving more Republican.
It's definitely doing so. Pennsylvania is the most important presidential battleground that we have. It is rapidly reddening, and since the 2024 election, you're looking at 111,000 plus registrations net to the right. So it's only a 2 point Democrat registration advantage overall, down to about 174,000. But they keep a secondary voter roll as well, and it's the inactive voter roll. And the Dems only have a lead of 52,000 in the active voter roll, which is barely over 0.5%. So the active roll is nearly even. That's continuing to move that direction. And most importantly, when you look at the key working class bellwethers, Erie and Northampton counties, you see the same continued motion of the working class moving away from the left and towards the right.
So you have previously made a big deal out of corruption in the big cities in Pennsylvania. Is that getting better or worse?
It's still a problem. Pittsburgh, which is Allegheny County, sits far off to the west, where everything else around it is a massive Trumpian stronghold. And just so you understand how much Pennsylvania has shifted politically over the decades, not even Ronald Reagan could carry the counties of southwestern Pennsylvania out there in steel country. So the economic agenda of the new right definitely resonates over the heart of America. When you get towards the seacoast, like the eastern seaboard, and you have the big city liberalism, it's a bit different story. But remember, the key to the future political coalitions, I've had some people on my Substack say that sounds like pandering, going after the urban vote. But when you go with them with solutions, like cleaning up the crime, stopping the rioting, a lot of people see the stuff that's going on, like the political violence that's being perpetrated by the left, and they move away from that. So I think that things in Philadelphia County can only go up. And in fact, I met with some Pennsylvania representatives last week, and I said the Pennsylvania Republican Party should put 90% of its resources into Philadelphia County. And instead of losing it 85-15 in statewide races, lose it 75-25, and you're going to swing 100,000 plus votes in margin. But too many Republicans don't want to go into places that don't think like us. They don't want to spend money on places that they can't win, but it's not about win. It's about denting the margins.
Yes, yes. All right. Well, when we talked about Iowa, you said it mirrors Minnesota and Wisconsin. You've also made the point in Pennsylvania that it mirrors Michigan. So what should we know in Michigan? Obviously, a gubernatorial race and a Senate race there next, in this cycle.
So is the party registration trends are going to be less sticky, less predictive in the midterms. They're very spot on when it comes to presidential, but eventually they pile up. You've got such a big registration advantage in Wyoming, there's no way that seat is going to lose. So you reach a certain point where you have enough of an edge where the turnout differential from a midterm is not going to spoil you. And I think I've developed a model that I'm going to unveil over time that shows about 69 seats that could be flipped by either side in the next race. That means 85% of the House races are pretty much locked down. And that's before the maps get diced up. Missouri just diced up their map yesterday, and they're going to get rid of that dim seat for Kansas City. But with Michigan and Pennsylvania have moved together in every election since 1952. The last time one went right and the other went left was in 1948. So you got the same voting demographics. You have almost the same size. Michigan is about 3 million people shy of Pennsylvania's population, but you've got a dominant urban area there. Detroit is their Philly. You've got some suburban sprawl off of Detroit, like Oakland County, which used to be Republican Central, and Montgomery County used to be Republican Central as well in Philly. So you have a lot of the same political dynamics. There's a little bit of a demographic difference in the two. You've got a large Arab population there in southeastern Michigan. In Pennsylvania, you have a lot of German ancestry, so the heart of Pennsylvania is going to be solidly Republican. Richard Barris is one of those guys that actually separates white ancestry rather than having one monolithic vote. So the states have some differences, but largely they're the same. They move based on the economic pulse of the country, based on the populist economic ideas of the presidents who win them. Ronald Reagan being a great example, who won both handily. So Michigan should be continuing to have a redder disposition, especially if the GOP can figure out campaigning in Wayne County, but also dealing with the election corruption that is there as well. That's a major prohibiting factor towards victory.
All right, I want to move into the three N's: North Carolina, New Hampshire, Nevada. Let's start with North Carolina. Again, another move to the right here. What do we need to know as we head into an election year with Tom Tillis retiring, Michael Whatley, the former GOP chair in North Carolina and the national RNC chairman, running as the Republican nominee? But you've got Roy Cooper, the former governor, very popular for the Dems, and I've said this, tell me if I'm wrong, I believe North Carolina is the true proxy if there's one state that's like the true generic ballot election, meaning people are pretty much going out and voting Republican and voting Democrat, regardless of the candidate, not as much crossover, I think that's North Carolina. What do you think?
To a degree, Trump won the state at the presidential race, but the Dems won practically everything else down ballot. Mark Robinson was part of that issue, but North Carolina is dwindling down on the total voter roll, just like Pennsylvania. It's dwindling down to dead even. It's under 15,000 now with the most recent updates just in the early parts of September. Active voter roll, the Republicans have a solid lead of almost 100,000. So North Carolina is moving in that way, but there are two counties the North Carolina GOP likewise ignores: Mecklenburg, which is Metro Charlotte, and Wake County, which is Metro Raleigh. So those are two areas in which you have a lot of northeastern transplants moving. Charlotte's kind of got this Atlanta effect where the Dems are getting stronger in Mecklenburg County, but everywhere else it has got the major Trump effect going on. Just to show you how big that was, if Trump would have had Romney's margins in the 98 counties outside of Mecklenburg and Wake, he would have lost North Carolina. Charlotte and Charlotte and Raleigh, Mecklenburg and Wake now have a raw vote Democrat presidential margin twice as large as Obama's was in 2012. So those areas are getting scary. And the only thing saving North Carolina is all the Republican movement, especially to the Atlantic coast. That's a big area, just like in Florida along the coast down there in Wilmington. And you have you have some movement among minority voting groups, especially Native Americans that are in southeastern North Carolina. But as far as down ballot goes, North Carolina's got one of the Senate races that worries me, and that would be the Republican-held Senate seat Tom Tillis is vacating. The other is in Maine, but I think Susan Collins will probably hold that one down based on past precedent. So they need to get serious about a couple counties. As far as the political disposition goes, it should continue to shift. There is a large and expanding Latino voting population that grew 40% from 2010 to 2020, which at this rate in our political cycle is good. If Georgia had more Latino voting growth, I think I'd feel better about their trajectory because they're part of the future GOP coalition 10, 20, 30 years from now.
We have a potential pickup in New Hampshire. Gene Shaheen, the current incumbent Democratic senator, retiring. Scott Brown, former Massachusetts senator, and potentially the former Republican Senator John Sununu of New Hampshire are running. Chris Pappas, current congressman, one of two there, running. Do we have any update on New Hampshire at all?
Look, I think Chris Sununu would have been a shoe-in for the seat, so I'm kind of surprised that he didn't run. But New Hampshire is moving. It's another 10,000 registrations redder, 11,000 registrations redder than it was in 2024. And you and I pegged it that was going to be one of the tighter states, and it followed a strict voter registration formula. And it's another 11,000 to the right. Now, I would say that if you had a presidential election today, that would be one of the closest states on the map, New Hampshire. I think you're looking at a race inside a point and a half. But statewide politics, they still play Republican ball. The legislature is solidly a Republican, but in the federal races, they play differently. And this is why I urge people. So I get frustrated with a lot of Susan Collins's votes, but she voted 94% of the time with Trump in his first term. And, of course, she can't really be the most reliable vote when it comes to the divisive, really important issues. But she's also the only Republican senator that can win in Maine. So likewise, I think Scott Brown's a really good choice up there in New Hampshire. He won a special election in Massachusetts against the Democrats right after the Obamacare vote. Now, I will caution people. So if you've been worried about Republican special election losses here lately, remember that Scott Brown won a U.S. Senate seat in Massachusetts, and Obama went on to blow out Massachusetts and be reelected. So special elections are not predictive of the political future. They may signify that the party has issues moving in short spaces. But Scott Brown is a good choice. He's somebody that's done this before, and New Hampshire is a much better political climate than Massachusetts. And New England actually has, outside of Maine, has pretty decent election laws.
Yeah, well, reminder, my favorite phrase from when I was at the National Republican Congressional Committee is special elections are special for a reason. Let's move to the final N, Nevada. Tell me where we are in there and where we're headed.
Well, Nevada is 5,400 right of where it was in November. We had 3 months in a row where the Dems made some gains, but it's mostly because the Republican counties were cutting rolls. And a lot of these Republican counties outside of Clark and Washoe counties, some of these are R plus 35, R plus 40 or more. So if you're cutting people off, they're inevitably going to be Republicans. But Nevada is close to even. It's the Dems have a lead there of 37-65. And this is down substantially because when Trump ran in 2016, the Nevada Dems had a lead of more than 6 or 7 points in voter registration. And Nevada votes right. Nevada votes to the right of its voter registration advantage and has for some time. So a staying power for the shift of the minority working class. It's not just Latinos there. The Filipino vote in Nevada was also instrumental to getting Trump over, but it wasn't enough with the cheating going on with the mail balloting to get Sam Brown over. So Jackie Rosen kept that seat. But Nevada is it's still left in my mind. It would be left of Arizona, which of course I think we're probably going to jump right into.
All right, your state of Arizona. Am I reading this right? The D's have actually picked up a little, or am I reading the data wrong?
Well, no, you're technically reading it right. I called it in that same paragraph, I called it statistical noise. And the reason I call it that is because the only two counties I can get consistent updates on are Maricopa and Pima counties. So that would be Metro Phoenix, Metro Tucson. The other 13 counties only come out when I get a Secretary of State update, maybe quarterly. So if I had visibility on the other 13, Arizona would almost certainly be moving right. And Arizona's on a pace. I wrote an article about Katie Hobbs. When Hobbs made it into office, I'll just leave it at that to be graceful. When she made it into office in 2022, the Republicans had a voter registration lead of 166,000, and her margin was 17,000 votes. So she was 183,000 left of the voter registration advantage. Now the Republicans are over 328,000. So if she runs 183 left of that, she would still lose by 145,000 votes. So I don't like her chances. Right. I think Andy Biggs is going to be the next governor of Arizona. But there's a lot of positive signs in the Arizona data. The Maricopa electorate is very finicky. The suburban electorate is very soft R. You have a lot of LDS voters who had some problems with Trump early on who came around. But they're the slippery group. So as long as Biggs can hold that group, then you should be looking at a governor who will sign Rachel's bills and other Republicans' good bills that could be used to potentially springboard Arizona like Florida.
All right. I don't know how much data we have on New Jersey, but public polling shows that Jack Ciattarelli, who was on the show earlier this week, is within the margin of error there in that race for governor. I said to him at the time, I'll say to you, I always feel like Lucy with the football, but I will say New Jersey's margins have moved in the right direction for Republicans over the last decade and a half. Is there anything that we need to glean out of New Jersey?
Well, New Jersey is 44,000 to the right registration-wise where it was in November 2024. However, I don't think that in an off-year election like 2025, that's going to really be the decisive factor. I believe Ciattarelli was in. I believe Ciattarelli was within a point in the last race, right around a point off. And that was in 2021 with Biden in office shortly after the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal. I don't necessarily think that factors are good right now. The conditions are good, but I do think that we're more likely to pick up the governorship in Jersey than we are in Virginia. A lot of this is going to be if those minority voting groups are willing to shift their patterns of voting. There's a lot of Asian voters throughout central New Jersey that really backs Trump. And maybe if you get low turnout in the Newark area in northeastern New Jersey, then you could have a tight race. I would favor the Dems in that race.
All right. Well, you said something that worries me as a Virginia voter. Winsome Sears is like sort of on paper the dream candidate. She's a black female Marine veteran, incumbent lieutenant governor running for governor. Why don't you feel as confident about her chances?
Youngkin's margins in 2021. Think about Glenn Youngkin. He's been a pretty good governor, but he's non-threatening. Somebody who ran against a person that everybody in Virginia was tired of, Terry McAuliffe. Shortly after Biden's Afghanistan withdrawal, with a Democrat president in office, of course, Youngkin ran 300,000 votes shy of Trump's 2020 total, but McAuliffe was 800,000 short of Biden's, which should also make you look at the 2020 election in Virginia, but that's not the point of this. But the big issue in Virginia's suffering and Southern Maryland's suffering because of the growth and the bloat of the federal government is what other 48 states want to see. What the other 48 states want to see, they want to see the swamp get drained. The swamp getting drained pisses off the voters of Northern Virginia, which that would be Nova, that would be the 10 counties and independent cities that are surrounding Washington, D.C. And a number of those, like Fairfax County, Loudoun County, those counties are specifically really hit hard. So when we laugh about all the brown boxes coming out of the Department of State, people writing messages on the bathroom mirrors, those folks are going to go home and vote. And I think I know who they're going to be voting for. So if you're the Republican candidates in Virginia, what is your campaign? You know, because if you come out and you're too hard in support of Trump, so you get the support of rest of Virginia, which is disadvantaged by about 250,000 votes in a presidential election, then you're going to tell Northern Virginia, you're going to tell Northern Virginia that I'm glad you lost your job, right? So if you go soft with the Trump Association, you go to Northern Virginia and you coddle them like Youngkin did, then the base in the rest of Virginia doesn't turn up. So unless it's the lowest turnout of election of all time, or the black vote massively shifts sides in what is still culturally the South, Southern Virginia, which is not likely, then I struggle to see a real path here. But Abigail Spanberger has a lot of issues that are coming out. And like my dad always said, you play the games for a reason and it's never over till the last man is out. But to me, it's a very tough campaign to advise. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you go to Nova to get the margins you need and still placate everybody else outside of Northern Virginia with your level of base support.
All right. Seth Keshel, I always love our conversations because they're data informed. They're not guessing. And I love the trends that you follow. Thank you for being with us, especially on this unfortunate and tragic week. I wish you the best as we head into the weekend, to you and to Rachel and the rest of your family and the entire Arizona community as you deal with this issue of Charlie and Turning Point. So thank you for being with us, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Sean, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate your stand for the truth, for being out there as a prominent voice in the fight for freedom. For everybody watching, it's a sad day. It's a heavy thing to remember. And you know, it's also hard to come out here and talk the tradecraft in light of something like that. But I do think that the only way to honor those who fight for freedom is to get out there and stand strong for what you believe in. And I appreciate you, and everybody can keep up with me at captaink.us.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Have a good one.
Bet.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.